Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. The government was set to establish an Ombudsman Office tasked with managing and investigating complaints against the public service. However, the legislation underpinning it, which was initially slated to be tabled in Parliament last October, has since been delayed pending re-evaluation of its scope, function and role. We've yet to hear any updates regarding the progress of this re-evaluation, despite calls for the government to move ahead with the establishment of a proposed Ombudsman Office. So joining us on the show now is Pushpan Murugiah, who is the CEO of the Centre to Combat Corruption and Cronyism. The C4 Centre recently released a paper detailing its proposed structure of a Malaysian Ombudsman Office. Pushpan, thank you for being on the show with me. I'm wondering whether we could begin very quickly by you helping to explain what the role of an Ombudsman Office is. What's the significance of Malaysia having an Ombudsman Office in the context of governance and accountability?
Hi, Melissa. Thank you for having me here. So I think let's go down to the issue of ombudsman. I think ombudsman, the word has been often used and maybe not really understanding how it works. So in terms of why we need ombudsman here now is firstly to ensure good governance and efficient public service delivery and an independent mechanism, because we need to also have that idea we need to bring out there that we need to share the concept of the right to complain. So people must have an avenue or an institution that's independent, that they are confident enough to go and complain about maladministration or public office issues. So I think that's where the key role of ombudsman playing into the current framework of governance.
All right. Pushpan, isn't there already an avenue to do so? There is a Biro Pengaduan Awam that Malaysia has. Why is that not sufficient? And why do we need an Ombudsman Office if we already have a Biro Pengaduan Awam?
Yeah, that's an important point, because even in our report, we had a long discussion on whether do we actually want to strengthen the PCB instead of having a new oversight mechanism. But I think the shortfall at the current mechanism oversight by the PCB is the fact that it is not independent. It is parked under the Prime Minister's department through a circular, so that you have the influence, the potential influence of executive, dictating decisions and stuff like that. Second thing I think is what's more important is that the PCB functions now is, to be pretty crudely out there, maybe in a sense like a post office, where complaints are received and then it distributes out to relevant agencies to actually address those issues. But what is lacking is that ability to investigate complaints, to ensure that the complaint is properly investigated, looked at different angles, how to improve and how to recommend changes to the particular agency. So that aspect in that whole chain of activities is missing. So we want that ombudsman to fill that role. I think that is where the ombudsman can play a significant role in how that maybe the PCB can be migrated or strengthened or morphed into an ombudsman office.
Okay. Well, you mentioned a bit earlier you hope for an Ombudsman Office to have some accountability over maladministration. I'm quite curious about that word, Pushpan. What does that mean? What is maladministration in the context of governance?
Okay, very simple. I'll give you an example. Maladministration basically things like, for example, you did not follow the particular procedure in your department. Okay, you made a complaint, but nobody picked up your complaint. Nobody gave feedback to your complaint. Or you made a decision that was so wrong and unjust that it becomes a public interest issue. So these are in a context what it means by maladministration. It doesn't deal into the, for example, the Corruption Act in a particular. It doesn't deal in the Corruption Act. It deals with how the process of investigation was done, or did you follow procedure. So that is the distinction that we need to put in place in terms of the role of ombudsman and why certain issues it doesn't take into account.
Okay, there are already, though, certain institutions. So we have, yes, the Public Complaints Bureau, but what about other oversight mechanisms? When you talk about corruption, there's MECC, there's already one that looks specifically at police, IPCC. What gap would an Ombudsman Office address or fill?
Okay, I think you brought a very interesting discussion, because we had also a large discussion on this particular in terms of how do we find the distinction or the overlap between so many oversight mechanisms. As you mentioned, MACC is there, IPCC is there as well, Suhakam is there as well, EAIC is another one. So after all our research for 8 months, we identified that there are issues or there are particular oversight that are actually overlapping. An example would be the EAIC and the PCB, because their framing of the terminology of maladministration appears to be similar. So our suggestion was to actually combine both of these into the new ombudsman. And we looked at also MACC and Suhakam. Now, we recommended that MACC, Suhakam, and also IPC not be absorbed into ombudsman because MACC plays a specific role of looking at corruption crimes. Suhakam looks at human rights issues, and police issues are managed by the IPC, which we prefer to have IPCMC, but is the IPCC. Right? So that's where we need to distinguish which is important, what function each mechanism plays. But that doesn't mean that ombudsman has got no oversight. Let me give another example to make it more clear. So a person complains to MACC. It is a corruption issue. I complain to MACC. No action was taken. So what happens now is he has a right to complain to the ombudsman saying that, look, there was no action on my complaint. And the ombudsman, being a tier 2 complaints receiver, will investigate why it was not acted upon. But they will not investigate the corrupt act itself. So that's another example of how the maladministration issue becomes a component of their investigation.
Right.
So
Just to elaborate, the tier 2 complaint that you're referring to are the complaints that have already gone to the relevant government agencies and then come to the Ombudsman Office.
Yes, okay. Correct. So that's where the tier 2 role plays. So in that instance, you can see the separation of functionality and how the defining element of maladministration plays a role in the whole process.
Okay, so you mentioned that the proposal by the C4 Centre is to absorb, so essentially consolidate the EAIC and create this new Ombudsman Office. Why is that the proposal? Why is the EAIC not serving its role or its function based on what the C4 is proposing?
So as I mentioned earlier, PCB, which is one of the complaint mechanism now, and EAIC also has a complaint mechanism. Their definition of maladministration is similar. So our proposal, since they have similar understanding of framework in defining maladministration, and they carry out the same kind of function, it's better for them to merge. That was the function behind it. That was the rationale why we wanted to have the EAIC function merge together PCB to form the ombudsman. As I mentioned earlier, the others have a specific role, specific laws that govern specific areas. So we should not touch them, but they still act as a tier 2 mechanism in terms of oversight.
You pointed to the fact that the Ombudsman Office must have the ability to investigate complaints. Why is that important?
Okay, I think the main recommendation for us is to push for expansion of their investigative powers. It's very important because we cannot, as I mentioned earlier, have an ombudsman that does a post office service to deliver everywhere, but they have to be able to expand their investigative powers to include things like calling for witness, looking for documents, looking at logs, even calling for official secret documents, because they must have the ability to do a thorough investigation and provide proper recommendations, proper actions to be taken by the ministry or the department. Now, I also want to clarify this particular point of ombudsman. We need to look at ombudsman as a conciliatory function. Its job there is to provide recommendation and to initiate reforms within the civil service. Now, the question remains, okay, if you do that, there's no power, there's no tooth, you can't enforce it. So what happens to that recommendation? So the accountability portion, what we recommend is to go through the parliament or select committee. So whatever recommendation that has been given to a particular officer or department, you have to do it. If you don't do it, it will be called out in parliament or select committee for you to answer why you did not follow that procedure. So the accountability aspect is through public chambers, and it's not through enforcement or prosecution by the ombudsman. So you make it very clear.
Right. So the ombudsman is one specific person, I assume, but with an office of people. Who should be with this? I mean, just to clarify, who should be in the ombudsman office? What type of role, given the type of role that we're hoping to see as a check and balance, who should the office make up of?
Okay. I think it's also a common confusion that Ombudsman Office, Ombudsman, it's individual, but technically actually it's Ombudsman Office. It's an office of staffs. You have got officers, you have got many staff working on cases. So I think you bring a very important aspect. The element of independence, not only through the appointment process, but also must look at the framing of the candidates. How do you actually collect a pool of candidates that can deliver work? And I will always suggest that it has to be open to public. And public has those who feel that they have the merit, they have the qualification, can apply. You will go through a selection committee, which will be controlled under Parliament through, again, select committee or maybe a parliamentary group, where they will select the best candidates, and it will go through a two-thirds majority vote in Parliament. Even removal itself, you have the same. So what we are proposing now is to expand the pool of expertise to everybody, not just people within the civil service, academic, but everybody who feel that has got capacity to develop and provide ways to increase the concept of public interest that comes first.
I'm just thinking about it. Should an ombudsman office have investigative powers of the public service? There comes this contradiction or I think conflict because we don't have strength in our whistleblower protection laws. How do we reconcile that? If this is something we're aiming to do, a reform that we're hoping to institutionalize, what do we do about our whistleblower gaps?
Absolutely right. Because we're also working on trying to push for the amendments to the Whistleblower Act. But one component of the ombudsman is that we are pushing for the whistleblower right to actually complain to ombudsman, and they are one of the agencies that is allowed to provide whistleblower protection. So to reconcile that is that now you are taking not just MACC or the police as enforcement agencies to receive whistleblower. Now you have a truly independent body that you can complain whistleblower issues through them. And they have the power to give you the protection under the Whistleblower Act. So that is a way for us to reconcile and give public confidence that there's another agency that is strong, that's independent, and under Parliament to give you that protection. So that's where we're looking at the intersection between whistleblower and also ombudsman.
Right, and we were hoping to see this ombudsman bill tabled last October. We haven't heard anything in terms of updates. What do you reckon are some of the main barriers or challenges that's hindering the establishment of what's behind this delay? Do you happen to know?
Okay, Ken. Maybe it's just my opinion, but I hope I don't get in trouble for this. But technically, I think basically I feel there's a pushback from other oversight mechanisms, that there's another independent oversight that has power in a way over them in terms of tier 2 correction. So I think there is a conflict between the power structure, who is going to be controlled or under the oversight of who. And I think that issue has to be addressed very quickly. And if we look at ombudsman's philosophy and function, it's basically very reconciliatory. It's not designed to punish, to pick out, it's designed to reform within the civil society. Within the government department. So if we can understand the role ombudsman play, then it can be a brilliant tool to actually reform the government departments to be more accountable. And it will give a lot of confidence to the public that look, there is changes are happening, things are moving, and it gives a lot of confidence that there is reforms happening within. So that role has to be captured and understood by all the other departments, all the other agencies. That it's not there to punish them, capture them. It's to provide recommendations, reform within themselves, so that they can actually bring public interest to the surface.
Pushpan, thank you so much for sharing your insights. Pushpan Murugiah from the Centre to Combat Corruption and Cronyism. We're going to take a quick break here and consider this. We will be back with more. Stay tuned. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. Let's continue our discussion about the government's delay in tabling the Ombudsman Bill, which would pave the way for the establishment of an Ombudsman Office. Joining me on the show now is Professor Dr. Ahmad Kamal Mahmood, who is a constitutional lawyer and head of the Politics, Law and Governance Cluster of the National Professors Council. He was a commissioner with the Enforcement Agency Integrity Commission, EAIC, from July 2020 to June of 2022. Professor Nick, thank you for being on the show with me. What do you make of the C4 Centre's suggestion to consolidate the EAIC with a proposed Ombudsman Office?
Hi, Lisa. Thank you for inviting me again this time. And you see, C4 suggestion actually was already mooted up when I was there at EAIC. In fact, we were discussing at that time we were discussing the possibility of the Ombudsman Office and EAIC become one agency, so one unit. But our discussion was just within ourselves. But there was, in fact, suggestion from the other side. At the time was GIACC was in charge, right?
Mm.
And in fact, the suggestion was in fact very, very relevant, and I agree with the suggestions. There are many reasons for that. Ombudsman's power is much more than what EAIC has. Okay, the EAIC is a statutory body created under a statute, and EAIC has the power to investigate complaints against, at that time, was 21 government departments and agencies. So after the establishment of the police complaint commissions, EAIC now is only in charge for 20, right? So if they are merged, I mean, Ombudsman and EAIC, I agree with what C4 had said about streamlining and more effective infrastructure,
Right.
oversight infrastructure.
Okay. There are some people who may argue that we may not want to add another layer of bureaucracy, even if it is an oversight mechanism. Instead, maybe we should be looking at making more robust the EAIC or the Public Complaints Bureau. What do you say to those suggestions?
I think our concern, perhaps the shortcomings or the what we do not have under the statute at that time. And in fact, even today, the new commissioners were already appointed at AEIC that we investigated. We refer the complaints to the relevant agencies and requesting formally the agencies to take actions against the errant civil servants, right? And we have suggested the kind of punishment that should be imposed on the civil servant, right? But unfortunately, in many cases that we suggested, say for example, we suggested a stringent disciplinary actions were recommended for a particular misconduct. But at the end of the day, the agencies or the departments did not take our recommendation. You see, they have their own way of dealing with the errant civil servants, which in a way we call ourselves at that time was a toothless tiger. You see, EAIC was toothless. We investigated and found an evidence of misconduct, but at the end of the day, we could not do anything about it because, but ombudsman could be different because ombudsmen would have more power, including the power to provide remedies, you see, to the complainants. So that would be very interesting to have an ombudsman. But
Yeah,
I do not see, yeah.
if I may just very quickly interject, how do we ensure that the Ombudsman Office does not become a toothless tiger? Are there any insights that you can offer as a former commissioner of the EAIC that you would like to see built into the foundations of Ombudsman Office, starting with the Ombudsman Bill?
I think what is necessary here is that an oversight agency is not just to investigate and make recommendations. You see, they can do that, but at the end of the day, the recommendation may and may not be accepted by the other agencies, by the intended agencies. I think that's the real problem. So what ombudsman would do is to investigate and provide remedy to the parties concerned. Of course, they would not have the power to impose disciplinary punishments against errant civil servant, because that the power of punishment for disciplinary misconduct is the agency, the department itself. But then again, the ombudsman will be able to tell the agencies that you need to do this and that, so that to remedy whatever shortcoming, whatever damage has caused to the complainant. I think that is what is important for
Okay.
ombudsman.
So, how do we get over that hurdle? It seems to be that one of the biggest hurdles or the main challenges in establishing an ombudsman office in Malaysia for greater accountability and oversight seems to be the pushback from the agencies it would have oversight over. How do we get government agencies and government bodies to be to embrace the institutional reform of having an ombudsman office?
I think the minister in charge of law, I think Datuk Sri Azalina, had made a statement. I think it was last year. Made a statement about the proposed ombudsman framework, as well as the bill to be tabled in Parliament. That was her statement was made in, I think it was made in, if I'm not mistaken, May or June last year. So that would be very significant, because it was already in place. It's a matter of refining and fine-tune the bills, and then to be tabled hopefully this year. All right. So I hope that that bill includes also the power of the departments to command, the relevant agencies or departments to take actions against the civil servants, or against any head of departments or anyone involved maladministration. So that's very important, because otherwise, if the ombudsman investigate and then recommend for a remedy and no remedy comes, right? So that would be like, again, going back to this issue of having an oversight committee not having any power at all, right?
Right. All right, definitely. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on the role of an ombudsman in the Ombudsman Office in promoting integrity within a public administration, and whether you feel that the EAIC serves its purpose in encouraging and promoting these values within public service.
The role of the EAIC is not just about investigating complaints. The role of the EAIC is also to look into the procedures that a particular department is having. And these procedures could be this procedure could be insufficient to deal with certain process. All right. In fact, we have the power at that time. I was still the commissioner. In fact, under the Act, it is also the duty of the EAIC to look at the SOP that a particular department like custom or immigration have, and to ensure that the SOP that they have is actually able to deal with the issues that they have. Okay, or whatever process that they have must be sufficient. So EAIC commissioners have the right to look at those SOP and suggest changes to the SOP. So that is an important role to ensure to improve integrity and governance in the government department. Yes.
Right. Professor Nick, thank you so much for speaking with me. That was former EAIC Commissioner Professor Dr. Nick Ahmad Kamal, Nick Mahmood, wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.